Good evening. Today is the 19th day of December, 2015, and we are continuing our explorations in Savitri, Book 2, Canto 3, The Glory and Fall of Life. As always, I begin with some letters from Sri Aurobindo. This is brief, but very important. Savitri is represented in the poem as an incarnation of the Divine Mother. This incarnation is supposed to have taken place in far past times, when the whole thing had to be opened so as to hew the ways of immortality. The poem was originally written from a lower level, a mixture perhaps of the inner mind, psychic, poetic intelligence, subliminized, vital. Afterwards, with the higher mind, often illumined and intuitivized, intervening. Most of the stuff of the first book is new, or else the old so altered as to be no more what it was. The best of the old has sometimes been kept almost intact because it had already the higher inspiration. Moreover, there have been made several successive revisions, each trying to lift the general level higher and higher towards a possible overmind poetry. As it now stands, there is a general overmind influence, I believe, sometimes coming fully through, sometimes coloring the poetry of the other higher planes fused together, sometimes lifting any one of these higher planes to its highest, or the psychic, poetic intelligence, or vital towards them. First mention of the overmind.
Among the many things of Aurobindo, which are so beautiful, one of them is such a scientific precision about everything that he is doing. And in him we find a perfect fusion of the scientist and the artist of life. And they are blended together so beautifully.
And how he speaks about how he's experimented.
Yes. When he speaks about the planes of consciousness and how they intermix with each other. Yes. So that's an important thing that when we present it mentally, I've seen presentations on planes and parts of the being, and I think earlier also we spoke about it. We often present it as if they are cut and dried, like this is it, this is it, this is it. Mm. But what we see in this letter is that in actual real time, as I keep saying, yoga is a real time event. It's not something which it's not a book chapter by chapter study. So in real time, these things are mixed. They are sometimes terribly mixed, sometimes they are mixed, and we have to discern these strands and learn to separate the true from what is distortion of the truth. So this is what we see here. I think we slip into this chapter with this thought. Canto 3, Book 2, Canto 3, The Glory and the Fall of Life. So essentially, Aurobindo's, if I may use the word thesis or thought, that life can be transformed. It comes from this fact that life in its origin is divine. So if it is divine in its origin, it always has a possibility of regaining its divine stature. If life is not divine in its origin, then whatever change you may bring to it, whatever surface changes, whatever deeper changes, uplifting moments, yet it will reach a point and then stop there. So life in its origin is divine, and that's what we see in this canto, The Glory and the Fall of Life. But first, Aurobindo describes us with an amazing, this is a very beautiful passage, a lot of power in it. Yes, a lot of power in it. And it's a description of the surfaces of life, the way we experience it. And its many moods, so many ways life expresses itself. An uneven, broad ascent now lured his feet. So this is one of the things about life, is that it's not a smooth sailing. It's uneven. By its very nature, it is uneven. Second is that you can't define it. Life defies definition. So much has been written, so many books, so many philosophies, and yet it defies definition, because every facet of life is only one facet out of infinite other facets. So how do you define something which by its very nature, if you really try to pick up all the finite moods and ways in which life expresses itself, will eventually point towards the infinite. So uneven, broad ascent, answering a greater nature's troubled call. So there is another thing about life, is on the surfaces particularly, it's troubled. Why it is troubled? We'll see that later. Because it's seeking for itself. It's like, at one point Aurobindo will describe like a child who is orphaned from its own home and is looking for his parents, fumbling through fog in search of paradise.
Yes.
It doesn't know. It's like a child who has been left outside, who somehow knows that I belong to a heavenly parentage.
And it is a greater nature.
Yes, greater nature. But doesn't know. Doesn't know exactly, but just a intuitive sense. This story in Mahabharata of Karna, who intuitively feels that he is not born to be just a, charioteer. There is something more in him, something greater, but doesn't know. He doesn't know that his mother is a great empress. So this is how life is. So there is a troubled call. He crossed the limits of embodied mind. So now we see that till subtle physical, one can experience the subtle physical in reveries, in which momentarily one slips into that state and then comes back.
And often so beautiful.
Often so beautiful. But for the life, worlds of life and worlds of mind and beyond, you have to go beyond the limits of the embodied mind. Because embodied mind immediately categorizes, slots, puts things in this slot, that slot. You cannot experience life in all its fullness. So here Ashupati has gone beyond the limits of embodied mind and entered wide, obscure, disputed fields. It's shifting sands. It's like, how do you measure in the ocean? Supposing you have a land in the ocean, or you are given a certain portion of ocean as your own. How do you demarcate it? Of course, we are trying to do it. We are fighting over waters. Yes. Whose water is it? Whose sky is it? We try to do it, but the fact is it's shifting. You can't say exactly. The mind, how it will say, okay, this much distance from the shore. The shore itself is uneven. It's such a disputed territory. So here we have disputed fields where all was doubt and change and nothing sure. Life is ever changing. And therefore, you feel you know it and it changes.
Yes.
You are sure of something and there it goes. A world of search and toil without repose. When you feel you have found it, it slips between your fingers. As one who meets the face of the unknown, a questioner with none to give reply. Because actually it is a principle of nature that the level at which the question is raised, the answer is never given at that level. So very often when people ask me, they raise certain questions, issues, and they ask about, the answer. So basically it's this, very simple, that if the mind knew the answer, there would be no question. So if the mind raises the question, that means the answer is not found at the level of the mind. It has to be found by transcending the mind. You cannot find an answer at the level of the plane where the question is raised. Because if the answer is there, there would be no question to start with. So people very often don't understand this. So they raise a question with one part of the mind, try to solve it with another part of the mind. So here so beautifully Aurobindo describes that life raises questions, but there are no answers. Nobody is there to give answers. It has a seeking. Attracted to a problem, never solved. Always uncertain of the ground he trod. Always drawn on to an inconstant goal. He traveled through a land peopled by doubts, in shifting confines on a quaking base. So this is the experience of journey through the realms of life. That it's ever changing. You see a form, a figure, unlike subtle physical, where there is lot more concreteness. The forms remain the same. The mother speaks about it that if you see an arrangement in the subtle physical world, say in a room, subtle physical dimension of a room, you see some objects. She says if you leave it and come back after a few days, they will be very much the same.
Yes.
Very often they will be at the same place unless somebody has shifted them. But in the world of life, it's always changing. The beings are changing, the energies are changing, the patterns are changing.
Shifting confines
Shifting,
on
yes.
a quaking base.
Quaking base. In front he saw a boundary ever unreached and thought himself at each step nearer now, a far retreating horizon of mirage. This is what we experience in life. It looks, there we have it, here we have it, we got it. But when we reach there, we discover that it has slipped. Yeah. So, a vagrancy was there that brooked no home. Ah, nature of life is to be a vagabond. So it had brooked no home. A journey of countless paths without a close. So this is a characteristic of people who are driven by the impulse of life. That they will enter into many territories, many paths, many bylanes, but hold on to none. And at the end arrive nowhere. So it's a very tragic situation. But they don't understand because it's driven by an impulse of life which will go here, there, and at the end. Nothing he found to satisfy his heart. That's because life is seeking the infinite. A tireless wandering sought and could not cease. Now look at this expression. Tireless wandering. Normally, when we wander without getting anything, we get tired.
Get exhausted.
Exhausted. And people who are more living in the mind, they get exhausted. But those who live in the vital, who are conscious of the vital, they will take on another activity. They are spinning and dancing the whole day. Tireless wandering. Their life is the manifest, incalculable. This is another marvelous expression. You cannot calculate its movement, you cannot measure it, you cannot tie it into frames, you cannot predict it. So it's incalculable. A movement of unquiet seas, a long and venturous leap of spirit into space. Very often that's why oceans represent, world forces or even the power of life. And that's why we see that in matter, life was born in water. Water is same as, in fact, liquids in general, but water particularly is the life force. So it's ever moving, and when we look at the ocean, troubled, unquiet, heaving to the sky and never quite reaching, breaking off, but sometimes you wonder what that ocean wave must be experiencing as it climbing towards the moon. It may be thinking, here I have it. In the next moment it's crashed. So this is the experience of life. A vexed disturbance in the eternal calm, an impulse and passion of the infinite. So this is how most persons understand life, and that's why they cannot connect it with the deeper peace that comes by the liberation into the self. Because there is no connection between the two, and hence they declare that life is a vanity, it's a vain dream, or even like in some philosophy, it's a desire in the divine. But if we look at the ocean, it gives us this message. In the depths, the ocean is peaceful and calm, burdened with numerous possibilities. But as you go, closer to the surface, it becomes more and more turbulent, more and more violent, till on the waves. It's clashing and storms and God knows what. So life in its depths is also calm. Its origin is in that eternal calm. But as we experience it, it looks like a vexed disturbance in the eternal calm. Assuming whatever shape her fancy wills, escaped from the restraint of subtle forms, mind is the formature. So mind gives fixed forms to things. From higher mind onwards. Up there, it's a play of infinite possibilities with tremendous plasticity. But as we come lower and lower, mind crystallizes everything, makes it gives to everything a concrete form and shape. But life has a tendency to break free from that form. She has left the safety of the tried and known. The she comes.
Yes, she here is life, the life force. But Sri Aurobindo capitalizes the S.
Yes.
Very beautiful.
She has left the safety of the tried and known. This is its nature, because by its nature it is infinite and it cannot live in confines. So if you try to restrain the vital impulse, all these things have so much practical importance actually in everyday life. Like some people try to restrain the vital impulse by the mind, and it doesn't work like that. It will find its way to break free, and it used to be a common, I'm sure it still would be, when I was adolescent, and I'm sure it must be same with adolescents of today, that you make a rule and the impulse of life will find a way to break the rule. It just finds a way. It has its own, joy in doing it. In fact, there is a joy in doing it. If there was no rule, perhaps it wouldn't get that joy. But if there is a rule, it tends to break it because it has this urge inside it. So what is the way then? And Sri Aurobindo and the mother have given such a beautiful way, particularly in Center of Education. You can sublimate it, you can channelize it, you can lead it towards the discovery of its own infinity. But that requires yoga. But till then you can channelize it, you can sublimate it, but you cannot restrain it. You can purify it, you can refine it. But if you try to restrain it, it will break free with a tremendous degree of violence because it's the nature of life. It's not because of this or that person. So we see that she has left the safety of the tried and known, unshepherded by the fear that walks through time. Whoever ever bothered about the karmic law and restrained oneself, because the impulse to life is greater than that. There is a very interesting, there are many mystic poets in Sufi literature. And one of the poets says to the priest that you are trying to scare me with the fires of hell. I drink these fires day and night. So you are trying to scare me with the fires of hell. This is the nature of life. And if you give it a challenge, it will do it even more. So, unshepherded, look at this again expression. Unshepherded by fear. Our life is normally driven by fear. Oh, don't do this, this may happen. Oh, don't do that, that may happen. So fear is driving us through the roads of time, which is very unfortunate. Even people do good because they are afraid that if they do bad, they will rot or roast in hell. So, which is a very bad philosophy, because if you are doing good or not doing bad because of fear, the consciousness is very low and degraded, because there is no greater impurity and perversity than fear.
Exactly.
But
Mother
though
says it's the one thing.
One thing.
That has to go.
It is the worst kind of impurity.
Yes.
Of all things, fear. So, but normal life is driven like that. People eat all the good foods, right things, do all the right exercises, and they fall sick. So they ask sometimes that why this happened to me. I said, okay, what were you doing? So the person recounts that, I do this much asanas, I do this walking, I do all this and all my diet is strictly by the calories and this thing. So next question I ask is that why do you do all this? Oh, naturally I want to be healthy. Why do you want to be healthy? Oh, I don't want to fall sick. So you are afraid of sickness. Of course, who isn't? That's it. So it is fear which is going into the cells and which is far more toxic. It's one drop of fear can, corrupt the whole programming of the natural impulse of life. And much of this fear comes through mind. Life itself is not afraid because life knows its immortality. But the mind brings this. Undaunted by fate, that dogs and chance that springs. She accepts disaster as a common risk. What is life if there is no disaster? There is no joy of, there is a delight in everything, including being stranded on a Russian road after a near fatal car accident on the way. So, there is everything for life. These experiences are part of its play. And it bounces back. Careless of suffering, heedless of sin and fall. This is for the strong in the soul. She wrestles with danger and discovery in the unexplored expanses of the soul. She wrestles with danger and discovery. In sin and fall and danger and disaster, it plucks its fruit of delight through everything, because that's its home, which will...
But this next line.
Yes.
To be seemed only a long experiment. The hazard of a seeking, ignorant force that tries all truths and finding none supreme, moves on unsatisfied, unsure of its end.
That's it. So that is why if we talk about a perfect goal, though that's another mental way of saying, because in the ultimate truth there is no goal, there is no end, it's a constant unfolding of the delight. But since we live in a more relative world, if we talk about a goal, it's only by transforming life into its own infinity, into an expression of that delight, that it can find some kind of an ease and peace. Otherwise it remains troubled. That's why people have abandoned it. As saw some inner mind, so life was shaped. From thought to thought she passed, from phase to phase, tortured by her own power, or proud and blessed. Now master of herself, now toy and slave. Tortured by her own power. What an expression this is. How one can be tortured by one's own power? Because this power wants to express itself but is unable to express. It tortures secretly the heart. There are people who suffer from this. They have tremendous creative energy and a power of life inside, but their circumstances don't quite allow them to express itself. And they're very unhappy. You should just let them flow and they'll be fine, because they need to express. And they are caught up in the mechanical routine of life and they're very unhappy, tortured by the power. They dream of big things. They imagine the most fantastic possible things in life. And the mother says sometimes people unfortunately call them megalomaniacs. But they are dreaming right. They are not given the means to express it in a particular life. Maybe in the next life they will get, means to express it. A huge inconsequence was her action's law, as if all possibility must be drained, and anguish and bliss were pastimes of the heart. It's for the joy of that, joy of the journey. Look at Alexander. Actually, he's a strange kind of a fellow who conquers everything and then abandons everything. Actually, it was not so much to possess, it was the journey, traveling far and wide. And when he returns, the famous Alexander is a typical example of this prototype of life force, of course, from a greater life, world of greater life, where he meets Diogenes. You may be knowing this famous interchange. So Diogenes used to live in a small little tub where a dog would fit in. He was a mystic, an ascetic of sort, and Alexander has heard about him. So he goes to meet Diogenes, and Alexander says that I am Alexander the Great, and Diogenes says I am Diogenes the dog. He puts him straight on floor one. So what? I am Diogenes the dog, and I have a joy in that. Who are you to? So he says, what do you want? I can make you a house. I can do for you. I have heard you are a great man and all that. Diogenes looks up for a time and then says, all that I want is that you move out of my way because you are obstructing the sun. So Alexander has made a wonderful remark. If I won't be Alexander, I would be Diogenes. There is a greatness in both.
Yes.
The greatness of possessing something, the greatness of abandoning something, and equally being in delight and careless of what one has lost. So this people who are moved by an impulse to life, in a gallop of thunder-hooved vicissitudes, she swept through the race fields of circumstance, or swaying, she tossed between her heights and deeps, uplifted or broken on time's inconstant wheel. And we see these all what we are reading, particularly in the heroic age of mankind, because that was an age which was mostly centered around the impulse of life. So all the great wars, Mahabharata and the siege of Troy, we see. In through the mouth of Helen, Aurobindo makes some very wonderful, powerful expressions. So they are going for war, and Paris is bracing himself, and Priam says, okay, we shall fight. All that he asks Helen, they have called for a meeting. And Priam asks only one question. He doesn't debate about the pros and cons and who is going to win, who is going to lose. That is done in the assembly. Priam asks only one question to Helen. Do you really love my son? Yes. Fine. We go to war. For the first time, he says, there will be war for love. Of course, there have been war for love in Ramayana and war for love in Mahabharata. And, there is a war. And then Aurobindo makes Helen speak out. She is, of course, an incarnation of Kali. And she says, the day was wonderful when I entered Menelaus' life, her husband. It was wonderful that I spent my time with him. It was wonderful that I crossed the threshold of his house. It was wonderful that I eloped with Paris. Now, the joy of all this is that she has taken delight out of everything. Careless. She is not the type who is thinking, oh, I did a mistake, it was very bad and evil and, I am a sinner. Nothing. She says, I have taken the joy of all these experiences. And in the end, she says that it is understandable that nations may perish and civilizations collapse because of the beauty of a woman. This is the way the impulse to life works. And it did happen like that. And there is a greatness in that, because it's not about victory or loss. It's about a game well fought. It's about a death well deserved. Like, Abhimanyu, very often when people see Abhimanyu in Mahabharata, they feel very bad that here is a young boy who died. But this boy immortalized himself by his death. If he wouldn't have died, he would have been another obscure, fellow in the Mahabharata. His soul must have chosen. What a tremendous power. So this is how life goes on, uplifted or broken on time's inconstant wheel. And of course it rises from the pyre and the grave. Amid a tedious crawl of drab desires, she writhed a worm mid worms in nature's mud. This too is life, where it's writhing in the mud like a worm, confined to a small little body.
But then the opposite.
Yes. Then Titans statured took all earth for food. Ambition the seas for robe, for crown the stars. And shouting strode from peak to giant peak, clamoring for worlds to conquer and to rule. So many of these titans are, of course, driven by the life force, and they belong to the vital worlds, and we can see that in them. And it's not for really that they don't enjoy in the way we understand. Many of even today these business magnates, some of them live in a very an average way. It's not that they are wearing the most expensive suits. I mean, Warren Buffett, of course, we read about him, but many of them, they lead a life which is very normal. So one wonders that why do they want all this money? So people often raise this question, why do they want all this money? It's not about wanting money and using money. It's the joy of, doing something which is amazingly wonderful, and money comes as, circulating that force in the world and getting it back. It's not that they want money, and of course, there are some who want money, but many of these people are simply driven by a vital force which wants to take the joy of the many shades of life. That's all.
This interesting word, ambition.
Yes.
Sri
Yeah.
Aurobindo uses it as a verb.
Yes. Ambition. The seas for row. Clamoring for worlds to conquer and to rule, then wantonly enamored of sorrow's face. Life can get attracted even to the experience of sorrow and suffering. It takes a joy in that. Many times when people go through suffering, it aggrandizes the ego. Otherwise, one is an insignificant little human being. But when, no one understands me, no one cares for me, no one loves me, as if the whole world should be centered around me, and the me becomes vast like a great shadow. So even that sorrow emerges because it gives that sense of greatness to life, a perverse greatness, but nevertheless a greatness, because life is seeking that all the time, enamored of sorrow's face. And it has been celebrated in many poetries. She plunged into the anguish of the depths and, wallowing, clung to her own misery. It's the nature of life to go to the bottom end of anything it enters into. Mind will say, no, this far, not there, this territory, but life will go headlong. And if it goes, it wants to go to the end of an experience. In dolorous converse with her squandered self, she wrote the account of all that she had lost, or sat with grief as with an ancient friend. Just imagine. A romp of violent raptures soon was spent, or she lingered tied to an inadequate joy, missing the turns of fate, missing life's goal. And these are all the many moods of life. There is one of the longer poems of Sri Aurobindo, Urvashi and Pururava. And Pururava is a great warrior. He is a man who has actually fought for the Devasur war from the side of the gods. And while he is returning, there is a demon, and he is abducting a Apsara. And he slays the demon and saves the Apsara and falls in love with her. She says, okay, you have saved me, is fine, but I am a celestial being. I can't marry a mortal. Ultimately, if all said and done, you are a mortal. But then finally, she also loves him, and there is a condition that, okay, so many years I will live, and so on and so forth. The end of the story is that this is one of the themes of love's victory over death, but a partial victory. So when Urvashi has to go back, Pururava says, no, my love would hold you. But she has been granted that no, there are certain conditions, and when that happens, she has to come back. So he goes to the world mother, and he says, he is not an ordinary warrior. And he says that I want her in my life. So the world mother says, think again. Are you sure you want? You deserve, you can get. That's not the point. But are you sure you want? He says, yes, I want. And then Sri Aurobindo gives this expression, and earth rolled, abandoned in empty space. It was given to Pururava to save this earth. And that love ultimately got centered around one woman, even if she is an Apsara. and he misses the turn of fate. It was his fate. And the result is that Pururava's clans were always in a conflict. And they are the Pandavas and the Kauravas. So it's a very occult story that how sometimes, and this also is an experience of life. It takes a delight in that. It says, all right, because it sees all eternity before it.
Yes.
Another life, I will do this. So, yeah, very powerful lines, very powerful passages. Look at this line, lingered, tied to an inadequate joy. Something that life knows can never fulfill, never satisfy. And yet it lingers, parries with it. Or sometimes it breaks free and goes on to another field of experience. A scene was planned for all her numberless moods, where each could be the law and way of life, but none could offer a pure felicity. And that is the reason for death. In fact, Sri Aurobindo in the Life Divine says that there are number of reasons he forwards for death, but one of them says, but the most important reason is that life in its origin is infinite and it seeks the experience of the infinite but on a finite basis. So one life, one kind of law and way of life for most. I think you once spoke about Beethoven's life, and the mother was asked what would Beethoven be in another life. She said, why a cobbler? It is approaching the same problem from another dimension.
From a different angle, yes.
From a different angle. But in those in whom the impulse of life has been quickened and accelerated, in one lifetime, they may live many lifetimes of experiences. Many moods, many shades, many sides, and if they can integrate, many would go crazy. But if they can integrate, it's very enriching. And life can seek that. Sometimes in one life, many sides. In one life it can see a great victory, and one life it can see a great fall. So, only a flickering zest they left behind, or the fierce lust that brings a dead fatigue. Amid her swift, untold variety, something remained dissatisfied, ever the same, and in the new saw only a face of the old. We know it very well that, life is never satisfied. And there is a poem of Sri Aurobindo where he starts this way. There is a need within the depth of life. The splendors of the surface never sate. So when people blame themselves or others that, so and so, this happened, that happened, it's simply because life by its nature seeks infinity. It's not because there is anything wrong or right. Yes. It's the nature of life that it wants to construct infinity in as many ways as possible. And it experiences many moods.
And failure is a way to success.
Failure is a way to success.
I'm reminded of this beautiful poem of Antonio Machado when he says, last night I dreamt, marvelous error, that a beehive was in my heart.
Yes.
And the golden bees were making sweet honey from my past failures.
Wow. Yeah, it takes the essence of everything and turns it to honey. There's a very interesting set of poems of Sri Aurobindo, Meditations of Mandavya. It's amazing. You see there are many moods, and Mandavya is a great rishi. He is one of the immortals. A rishi who had arrived at immortality. But when you read the meditations, the reflections where he says, who said there is God? Only they have painted with their imagination a hunger. And next moment, in the next poem, he says something very different. I mean, there are the many moods of life through which we try to construct the divine. And that's what Sri Aurobindo says ultimately when he talks about the last reconciliation of evil. This is the most difficult thing to reconcile in God's world. Suffering can be reconciled. One can, explain suffering either by karma or, as Sri Aurobindo has explained, the need to evolve. But it's far more difficult to understand evil. Why there is evil. And there Sri Aurobindo says that ultimately, evil also, it was one of the possibilities in the infinite. That's how it has emerged. The problem is that in the infinite, in the divine, it is not experienced as evil because it is transformed and integrated with the rest. But on earth, it is isolated and experienced as evil, as something cruel, because it's one person in one lifetime is experiencing one dimension, which in its totality, I mean, divine also destroys. Kala or death is an aspect of him, but we don't call it evil. But when somebody murders, it's evil. Look at the same power. Where does the murderer draw his power to kill from? From the destructive aspect of the divine. But in the divine, the destructive, the creative, and the other aspects, they are harmoniously united.
This will be difficult for many people.
Many people. But Aurobindo says that. In the Superman, he says again that Shiva drinks the poison and so do the Titans. That's why they are dear to him. Aurobindo says that. The Titans are dear to him because they have drunk the poison like Shiva. But what the Titan does unconsciously, do that thou consciously as Shiva does. Then thou wouldst be the Superman. So it's the same experience. What is poison? It's bitterness. Shiva also experiences bitterness. And that's why this story of Shiva or Krishna, it's very difficult for human beings to understand how they can be divine. They are divine precisely because they have fused within them the many moods of the infinite, all rolled into one. And that's amazing. And yet they are so perfectly blended into each other. Shiva can destroy ruthlessly. Imagine beheading your own son, if you look at it. And then fixing an elephant head. How would you understand it? Somebody would say, oh, so cruel. But it doesn't, intuitively one feels. It's not cruelty, it is something else. Because Shiva's absoluteness. And then you see as the story unfolds, this beheading leads to something very interesting. That Ganesha, devoid of the ego of the gods, umbiled by an elephant head, becomes the first of the worshipped among the gods. But if we would do it carelessly, without compassion, without wisdom. This is the only difference, that in divine, it is one with wisdom and love, whereas in us, it is devoid of that. And if we have wisdom, then we don't have this side, and we think, no, this is divine, this is not, which is also an error. It's not that we construct a set of virtues, kindness, compassion, and this is God, and any act of destruction is not God. So we don't understand the Gita. How could the divine order a massacre, literally massacre, and how could he still be divine? Well, the fact is that the destruction also is an element of the divine fused one with him. So this is what Aurobindo is driving us at, that but in one life, unfortunately, we can experience only one aspect, or at the most two aspects, and then death comes. In another life, we have to experience another aspect, maybe something very different. And in the new saw only a face of the old. For every hour repeated all the rest, and every change prolonged the same unease. Because it's not that, it's something else it's looking for. A spirit of herself and aim unsure. Tired soon of too much joy and happiness. It just gets bored. People, you wonder, bungee jumping. What drives people to do this bungee jumping? This is how life operates. It shot into the skies, now it's not satisfied. It must take the downward plunge. And there also now people are trying all kinds of things, making it even more dangerous. Horror shows. How do you enjoy something like horror shows? But there are people who enjoy horror shows. That experience of everything, contraries, and they take it and yet, as you said, life extracts everything out of it. Ultimately, thus, end result is delight. Of course, Aurobindo is not saying we should follow this route. We should not mistake that. He is not talking here about the path of a yogin, but about the way life is, its nature. Tired soon of too much joy and happiness, she needs the spur of pleasure and of pain, and the native's taste of suffering and unrest. So there are people who, to get into alternate experiences, take drugs.
Yes.
It gives pain. It gives eventually suffering. They know that it's going to lead to suffering, and yet they go through it. So life can take so many shades and hues. And while, of course, man is given a sense of right and wrong, however relative and imperfect it is only navigation point in a vast ocean. But we must know the relativity of all these judgments. Life is seeking itself through every which experience. And yes, individually, till we have the higher law, what Mother speaks of as dharma, she says the only way we can understand is dharma. No other way. If you try to put in any other slot, moral, ethical, it doesn't conform to the true law, dharma. So it grows through everything. But otherwise, in real life, in real time, through all kinds of experience. As I said, I have seen, very interesting since I met it just a couple of minutes. There used to be a drunkard, and I have spoken of it several times, and he taught me so much. There are so many people you learn from them. And I used to be initially, it was in my genes. My parents were very averse to anything which anybody may do any wrong, like particularly drinking. They looked upon it as something, people who drink are very bad guys. And my first brush in medical college was when my room partner, who was turned out to be my best friend, used to drink. And I realized that no, it's not quite true. That there are people who drink who are very fine people, and there are people who never drink and are pure vegetarians like Hitler. They can do so many things. So, anyways, but still, it was in my genes. So I reacted. You fellow, you can, you are coming and abusing people sitting in the dispensary. Get out of here. And he took an offense, and it continued for some time till one day he surprised me. And a lot of things happened, and then one day I saw him near the Samadhi. And I said, my God, he loves... And somehow that day I felt a compassion, and I felt he had love for Mother. Why I felt there is no logic. A lot of people can go to Samadhi without any of, So I said, he has love for the Mother. Who am I to, judge him like this? And when he met me next time, again, all cross and all, I said, you know what? No, he was not cross. There were many things in between. But I said, you know what? Everything is gone in the background. Don't worry, because I know you have love for the Mother. And this man says, what else is there to love in this life? A total alcoholic surely would be taking drugs and many other things. So what else is there to love in this life? And it bowled me over. I said, if this man can have this experience of extreme love for the Divine Mother through all this, I think it was worth it. And I've seen such things in people's life. Another man who went into drugs, who died very young with cancer. And his father told me that it was a very painful thing, to see that. But his father's main concern was that did his life get wasted? He died in a rehab home finally. So he was thinking that, this boy, so with such beautiful things I brought him up. But did his life get wasted? Where did I go wrong? Parents can think all this. And he was sharing this experience with me that he said, Dad, one thing I have learned in my life. What is it, my child? So he says, Mother once told me 2 things. And all my life I have remembered them. And today I realize their truth in the deepest fullness. 2 days before his death. So what is it? So Mother told him 2 things. She says, remember, the Mother always loves you. This fellow had to be sent away because of a lot of serious problem. Remember, the Mother always loves you. Never forget. There was something related to not forgetting her. Never forget me. The gist was that you don't forget that I remember you always. And second was that I always love you. And then his father said it was such a peaceful thing for me that if in his life through all this misery he has learned this lesson, it's not an easy lesson. We may think that, okay, so what? There are people who may live for a lifetime in an ashram and yet not learn this very simple lesson. that the mother loves you. I mean, so, see, behind all this, she strains for an end that never can she win. A perverse savour haunts her thirsting lips. For the grief she weeps, which came from her own choice. Sri Ramakrishna used to explain this through an image of a camel. So a camel, it eats those thorny bushes. You hardly get anything, and it bleeds from the mouth, and still it eats. This is what it eats, the image of life. Grief that came from its own choice. For the pleasure yearns that racked with wounds her breast. Aspiring to heaven, she turns her steps towards hell. Chance she has chosen and danger for playfellows. Fate's dreadful swing she has taken for cradle and seat. I think these two lines itself is amazing.
Really?
Chance she has chosen and danger for playfellows. Like, life was asked, whom would you play with?
Yeah.
Well, danger. And Sri Aurobindo, see, this has its own place in yoga. Sri Aurobindo says that of misadventure have made me a friend. Who shall come with me? Who shall walk with me?
Yes.
Stark must he be and a kinsman to danger, who shares my kingdom and walks by my side.
Yes.
And that's why he could write to Niruddha that you think that we got everything easily. I have experienced not just danger, but living under the sword of death. We take it easily, we talk about the Alipur jail and, imagine that for 1 year, all of them were incarcerated in a prison in abominable conditions, where in all likelihood they could be sent to the gallows.
Yeah.
So to live life, experience it in so many ways. Fate's dreadful swing she has taken for cradle and seat. Look at the appropriate imagery. Swing is a very amazing thing. See, Sri Aurobindo in poetry often says that image should go with the substance. You should not use an image which has, like you can't say, I'm swinging mid the stars. He would say that, you don't swing mid the stars. There has to be a. But look at this image, that fate's dreadful swing. Now, what is the dreadful swing? Now, I don't know whether somebody has experienced swings or not, but I have experienced both sides. What is dreadful about it? So we had a small swing in my house, and it's nice to swing, but if an odd time you lose your grip or you are just, careless about it, you fall flat and it's very horrible. I have experience falling flat on my head and understanding that this thing which gives so much joy can suddenly be a source of such a sudden pain. So fate's dreadful swing life has chosen, and it becomes careless of that swing.
Yes.
But, and here comes the great but, yet pure and bright from the timeless was her birth. So we should not, for these reasons, disqualify life from transformation or divinization. Even in rags, I am God. Fallen, I am divine.
Yes.
So this is the nature of life.
These last 4 lines
Yes.
tell us all.
A lost world rapture lingers in her eyes. Lost world rapture. It carries within itself a delight which can embrace the whole world and all its multitudinous experiences. It is there in its eyes. It seeks for that. Her moods are faces of the infinite. So, as we were saying, it's very amazing that in Indian pantheon, there are dreadful gods also part of the pantheon which are worshipped, like Kali, terrible. All moods. So whenever a woman gets angry, well, men also get angry, to put a corrective, but women are unfortunately. But when people get angry, so I give a very simple remedy, that when a woman is angry, don't argue, don't get into, simply fold your hands and says, Jai Ma Kali. Mother Kali, I bow to you, salutation. Because that is actually at that point, it is Kali who is expressing herself. We don't realize it. Because it's a very personalized Kali. And we don't want our ego to die. But Kali comes to destroy the ego. So she has come to demolish the ego. But we want to hold on. So when we see outbursts of anger in the world, whether it's rational or irrational, well, anger is always irrational. By its nature, it is irrational. It cannot be justified. But when it happens, it always comes. It's, of course, even a sign of a weakness in the vital. But nevertheless, when we experience it, we should feel, well, somewhere Kali is trying to tell us to subdue our own ego and help us grow. So, a lost world rapture lingers in her eyes. Her moods are faces of the infinite. Beauty and happiness are her native right. Because her home is the all beautiful and the all wonderful. And endless bliss is her eternal home. It's a beautiful passage.